In a quiet kitchen where broken plates lay scattered on the floor, a little girl tried to be stronger than her years.
What happened?
Holding her baby sibling
You
close,
hurt?
she whispered through her tears,
The pasta
"Dad,
fell over.
my
I
back
didn't
hurts."
mean it.
That whisper, so small and trembling, would travel further than any phone call or message. It would pierce the heart of a man who once thought success was measured in money and remind him what it truly means to come home. Before we begin this heartwarming story, I want to thank you, dear listener, for spending these moments with us. May your days be filled with peace, warmth, and the love of family. Please share with me from which country and at what time are you listening to this story? The crowd was still clapping when the music faded, and the chandeliers of the new Whitmore retreat glittered like frozen constellations above them. Elias Whitmore stood in the middle of it all, a glass of champagne in his hand, his reflection multiplied in the tall windows that faced the snowy hills of Asheville. He smiled, or rather, his face arranged itself into what looked like a smile. Photographers leaned in, partners patted his shoulder. Someone raised another toast. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft, silent flakes drifting through the yellow light of the street lamps. Through the glass, Elias watched them more intently than he had watched anyone in that ballroom. They fell with a kind of honesty he couldn't imitate. Vivian, his ex-wife, had come for the ceremony, radiant in her beige dress, her laugh bright but hollow. When a reporter asked if she was proud of her former husband, she answered with rehearsed perfection, "Of course. Elias has built something remarkable." He nodded from a distance, catching the sentence in fragments. "Remarkable," he repeated in his head, though the word felt made of glass. Later, while everyone moved to the dining hall for dessert, Elias slipped toward the terrace. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of pine and champagne. From there, he could see the city below, tiny lights flickering like distant fires. Success had its own temperature, he thought. Cold, always cold. Down by the hotel gate, a small figure stood under the falling snow. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9, with a backpack and a handful of hand-drawn cards. She looked up, her cheeks pink from the cold, holding up one card for him to see. 3 people under an umbrella, drawn in crayon, the words, "Dad and me," scrawled above. For a second, something inside him shifted. The way she waited, uncertain, yet hopeful, reminded him of someone he hadn't thought about in years. He blinked, and she was gone, lost in the white curtain of snow. He returned inside to the warmth and noise. The pianist was playing something lively. Laughter echoed against the marble. Someone called his name, but Elias kept walking, through the crowd, toward the elevator. The applause had ended, yet the ringing in his ears continued. When he reached his penthouse, the silence hit him like a tide. No music, no voices, only the faint hum of the heating system and the wind brushing against the tall windows. The table was set for one. A bottle of Merlot waited uncorked, its label reflecting the golden light. He loosened his tie, poured himself a glass, and stared at the screen of his phone. Messages blinked from his assistant, from investors, from journalists, all congratulating him. He scrolled until he saw a name he hadn't expected. Hazel. "Dad, my back hurts." A simple sentence, almost childish. He frowned, checked the time, 10:47 p.m., then typed back, "Rest, sweetheart. Daddy's busy. I'll call you tomorrow." He hesitated before hitting send. Then the message left, and the quiet came back. The apartment was enormous, spotless, without a trace of family. Vivian had moved out years ago, taking only a few framed photos. He hadn't replaced them. He walked toward the balcony, the phone still in his hand. Outside, the snow had thickened. The city lights glowed beneath a soft haze. Somewhere out there, his children were sleeping, or maybe waiting. He tried to remember the last time they'd eaten together, the sound of Hazel's laughter, the way Noah used to tug at his sleeve. But memory felt like an old movie he'd once loved and forgotten how to play. He lifted his glass, watching the reflections dance within it. "To success," he whispered. The words had no echo. He set the empty glass on the counter and walked down the quiet hallway. Every sound in the apartment seemed to echo the click of his shoes, the soft sigh of the heater, even his breath. He stopped by a shelf filled with awards and crystal trophies, their engraved letters catching the lamplight. Each one carried a year, a headline, a victory, and none of them had a face. On the far side of the room stood an old photograph he hadn't noticed in months. Vivian, younger, radiant. Hazel as a toddler, holding a stuffed rabbit. He touched the edge of the frame, brushing a thin film of dust away. The silence behind the image felt heavier than the snow outside. He moved toward the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed quietly. Inside, there was wine, a few cold cuts, and nothing else. He opened a drawer for silverware, then closed it again without taking anything. He realized he wasn't hungry. He hadn't been for a while. When his phone vibrated, the sound startled him. It wasn't another congratulatory text, but a reminder. Call home. His assistant had programmed it months ago to keep his family connections visible. Elias almost laughed at the irony. He swiped the screen to clear it, but the words lingered in his mind like an afterimage. He turned off the lights one by one until only the balcony lamp remained. Stepping outside, he pulled his coat tighter. The cold bit into his hands, but the night carried a strange calm. Below, the highway wound through the hills like a ribbon of silver. Farther out, the faint lights of homes flickered among the trees, people finishing dinner, children watching TV, someone reading a bedtime story, lives still moving, still warm. He wondered what Hazel was doing at that moment. Maybe she was watching cartoons with Noah, or maybe she had already fallen asleep. He thought about calling back, just to hear her voice, but pride habit really held him still. Tomorrow, he promised himself. Tomorrow, I'll make it right. The wind picked up, carrying the faint scent of pine from the mountains. Snowflakes drifted through the light, soft and slow, landing on the railing beside him. He placed his hand there until the chill burned his skin, as if to prove he could still feel something. Inside, the clock ticked toward midnight. He poured the last of the wine, but didn't drink it. Instead, he sat on the couch, elbows on his knees, staring at the city beyond the glass. For all its lights, it looked lonely. He reached for the remote, flipped through channels, news, weather, late-night shows, all noise pretending to be company. Finally, he turned everything off. The apartment dimmed to a soft golden haze. Only the snow kept moving, blanketing the world in quiet. He stood at the window, breathing fog against the glass. In the reflection, he looked older than he remembered. Successful, yes, but hollow, like the marble statues he used to admire in hotel lobbies. For a long time he stayed there, unmoving, while the snow kept falling, steady and patient. Down in the valley, street lamps blinked under the storm. And somewhere beyond the hills, across town, a small light in a modest wooden house still glowed through the night. Morning came gray and quiet. The snow from the night before had turned the roads into a pale ribbon that wound between the pines. In a small house by Beaver Lake, a little girl stood on a stool beside the stove, trying to reach a heavy pot with both hands. Her name was Hazel Whitmore, and though she was only 8, the way she moved carried a kind of fragile determination that belonged to someone much older. Steam rose from the pot, fogging the window that faced the frozen lake. On the table behind her sat her little brother, Noah, with a bowl of cereal and his favorite red truck. "Don't spill it," Hazel warned, glancing over her shoulder. "I'm not," Noah said, dragging the toy across the tabletop, making quiet engine noises. The clock above the stove ticked softly. Their mother, Vivian, had left early for a charity dinner the night before and hadn't returned. Mrs. Hayes, the elderly neighbor who sometimes checked in on them, was out visiting her sister. The house felt too big for 2 small voices. Hazel stirred the soup again, trying to remember what her mother used to do when something looked too thin. She reached for the salt, just as the handle of the pot slipped in her grip. A splash of boiling water hit the counter. She jerked back, startled, and the pot tilted dangerously. "Hazel!" Noah shouted. She tried to steady it, but the metal burned her fingers. The pain shot through her hand and across her back like a lightning strike. The pot clattered to the floor. Soup spread across the linoleum like a golden puddle. Noah dropped his spoon and ran to her side. "I'm fine," Hazel whispered, though her voice trembled. She held her lower back, the warmth fading into a dull ache. Tears welled in her eyes, but she forced a smile for her brother. "See? Just a mess. We'll clean it up." She crouched to grab a towel, but the room swayed. The smell of soup and metal filled the air. Noah's small hand clutched her sleeve. "Hazel?" Her vision blurred. The towel slipped from her fingers. A low ringing filled her ears as the world tilted away from her. The last thing she saw before darkness closed in was Noah's frightened face. Across town, the noise of the day was just beginning. In his glass-walled office, Elias Whitmore adjusted his cufflinks while his assistant read the morning schedule. Investors' call at 10, press briefing at noon, and the board dinner at... But Elias wasn't listening. His phone buzzed on the desk, showing a number he didn't recognize. He almost ignored it, then answered absently. "Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore, this is Mrs. Hayes," came a shaky voice. "It's about Hazel. There's been an accident." The words didn't register at first. "An accident?" he repeated. "She fainted, sir. They're taking her to Mission Hospital. The doctor says it might be from exhaustion, maybe pain in her back." A sharp crack split the silence as the glass in his hand slipped and shattered on the desk. Wine from the night before bled across the papers like a spreading bruise. He didn't wait for more. The line went dead as he snatched his coat and keys, moving through the corridor without seeing the people who called after him. The elevator doors closed, sealing him inside with his reflection white-faced, breath uneven. Outside, the snow had turned into a heavy, relentless rain, the kind that blurred headlights and erased the lines on the road. Elias started the car, the wipers scraping furiously across the windshield. The phone rang again, another call, a voice telling him she was stable, not to rush. But he pressed the pedal harder, tires sliding against the wet pavement. The voice of the woman on the phone faded under the thrum of the storm. He could hear only one sound, replaying in his mind. "Dad, my back hurts." The highway blurred beneath a curtain of sleet. Elias gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles pale against the leather. Every few seconds, the wipers carved wide arcs through the rain. But the road ahead kept dissolving into gray. The heater blasted warm air that smelled faintly of dust. Yet his hands were still shaking. He tried calling Mrs. Hayes again, but the signal kept breaking. Each time the phone reconnected, he could hear only fragments. "She's resting. Mission Hospital. They said she'll be fine." "Fine," he repeated the word in his mind like a prayer, though it offered little comfort. The mountains around Asheville rose and vanished in the fog. Headlights from passing trucks glowed like wandering stars, briefly lighting his face before fading back into darkness. On the passenger seat, Hazel's text still glowed faintly on the screen. "Dad, my back hurts." He turned the phone face down, unable to bear the sight of it. He remembered her at 5, sitting on his knee while he pretended to type for work. "You're the boss, Daddy," she had said, proud and innocent. Somewhere along the years, he had let that pride become his entire life. The rain thickened into slush by the time he reached the edge of town. Streetlights shimmered across puddles, and the hospital sign came into view. Mission Health. Emergency. He parked without thinking, leaving the engine running as he ran toward the entrance. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and coffee. The receptionist looked up. "Sir, I'm looking for my daughter Hazel Whitmore. She was brought in tonight." The woman typed quickly, then pointed down the hall. "Pediatric ward, 2nd floor. She's stable." He took the stairs 2 at a time. At the end of the corridor, through a half-open door, he saw her. Hazel, small and still, an IV line taped to her arm. Her skin was pale against the white sheets. A nurse adjusted the monitor beside her bed and nodded when she noticed him. "You're her father?" Elias could barely speak. "Yes." "She's exhausted, nothing serious, just overworked, maybe not eating enough. Kids try too hard sometimes." He stepped closer, afraid to breathe. Hazel's hand rested beside a worn teddy bear. Her hair fell across her face, and he brushed it away carefully, the way he used to when she was little. "I'm here now," he whispered. "I should have been here all along." The nurse quietly left the room. Elias sat down, elbows on his knees, watching the rhythm of the heart monitor. Each beep was steady, patient, forgiving. Outside the window, rain turned to snow once more, the flakes drifting past the glass like slow seconds. He stayed there for a long time, not moving, until his phone buzzed again. Another message from his assistant flashed across the screen. "Reminder board dinner at 8. He turned it off and placed it face down beside the bed. When he finally looked up, he noticed a crayon drawing taped to Hazel's backpack on the chair. 3 figures holding hands under the rain. The same picture the little girl had shown him the night before outside the hotel. He exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to his chest. The room blurred for a moment as tears threatened to surface. Outside, an ambulance siren echoed faintly through the snow-filled night. And somewhere deep inside, the life he had built on noise and success began to crack. The storm didn't stop with the morning. It grew heavier, sweeping down from the Blue Ridge Mountains like a tide of white and gray. By the time Elias left the hospital to clear his mind, the city was barely visible through the snow. He had promised Hazel he'd be back soon, but he couldn't sit still, not yet. He walked to his car, coat collar turned up, breath turning to mist. Every gust of wind carried the same echo inside his chest. I should have been there. The phrase clung to him like the cold. He started the engine and sat for a moment without moving. The windshield fogged from his breath. On the passenger seat lay Hazel's small backpack, which he had taken home by mistake. It smelled faintly of crayons and something sweet, maybe the cookies Mrs. Hayes baked for them. The sight of it almost undid him. He set it aside, drove toward the hills, and let the radio fill the silence. A soft voice was singing Silent Night, a Christmas rerun on an old station. The song blended with the rhythm of the wipers. Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Elias laughed under his breath, a hollow sound. Calm, bright. Neither word belonged to him anymore. The road wound through the forest, like a memory he couldn't escape. He passed the old diner by the gas station where he used to bring Hazel for pancakes. The sign still flickered, though the place looked closed. For a heartbeat, he imagined her sitting by the window again, swinging her legs, syrup on her chin. He gripped the steering wheel tighter until his knuckles whitened. When he reached the turn toward Mission Hospital again, he slowed down. The snow came harder, covering the tracks he had left earlier. He turned into a small parking lot near the edge of the lake and stepped out, needing air. The wind stung his face, carrying the smell of pine and frozen water. Across the lake, lights shimmered faintly. Houses where families were gathered for breakfast, maybe hot chocolate on the stove, laughter echoing between walls. He realized how long it had been since his home had sounded like that. He thought of Hazel's tiny voice on the phone the night before. Dad, my back hurts. At first he had brushed it off, another childish complaint, but now the words felt like something sacred, a signal he hadn't deserved to receive. He sat back in the car, resting his forehead against the steering wheel. Memories flooded in Hazel's first day of school, her pink backpack too big for her shoulders. Noah, clinging to his father's leg, begging for one more story. He had traded all of that for board meetings, deadlines, and hollow applause. The heater hummed. Snow tapped gently against the roof. Elias closed his eyes and for the first time in years prayed not with words, but with regret. A knock on the window startled him. He looked up to see Mrs. Hayes, wrapped in her old plaid coat, her cheeks red from the cold. She had walked all the way from the hospital to find him. "You shouldn't be out here, Elias," she said, voice muffled through the glass. He lowered the window halfway. "I needed a moment." Her eyes softened. "You'll have plenty of moments once she's home. Don't waste this one feeling sorry." He nodded silently, unable to speak. When she walked back toward the hospital entrance, her footprints disappeared almost instantly under the falling snow. He started the car again, headlights carving a narrow path through the gray. The world outside was blurred, but for the first time, he wasn't looking for roads, he was looking for meaning. By the time Elias reached the hospital again, the snow had softened into a quiet drift, the kind that falls without wind, steady and unhurried. He left the engine running, afraid that if he turned it off, the silence would swallow him whole. The automatic doors opened with a hiss, releasing a faint scent of coffee and antiseptic that he had already begun to associate with guilt. Inside, the hallway lights were dimmed for the night shift. Nurses moved like shadows between rooms, their shoes whispering on the linoleum. Elias walked slowly, hands buried in his coat pockets, head lowered. When he reached Hazel's door, he hesitated before touching the handle, as if one more breath might change everything. She was still asleep, her small body framed by white sheets, the glow of the heart monitor painting gentle lines across her face. A cartoon played quietly on the television mounted in the corner, its sound barely a murmur. Noah had fallen asleep in a chair beside the bed, a thin blanket slipping off his shoulders. Elias stepped inside and stopped at the foot of the bed. For a long moment, he just watched her breathe. Each rise and fall of her chest felt like a miracle he didn't deserve. He sat down, elbows resting on his knees, his face buried in his hands. "I'm here now," he whispered, barely audible over the hum of the monitor. "I should have been here all along." His voice broke at the last word. It wasn't a confession meant for forgiveness. It was a truth that had waited too long to be spoken. He looked around the room, at the worn teddy bear on the bedside table, at Hazel's crayon drawings taped to the wall, families, rainbows, a crooked sundae. Each picture seemed to hold a message he had ignored. "We were waiting for you." Outside the window, flakes drifted against the glass. Their movement was slow, deliberate, as if time itself had chosen to ease its pace for this one room. Elias reached for Hazel's hand. It was warm, small enough to disappear inside his own. He could feel her pulse, faint but steady, reminding him that there was still something worth rebuilding. He sat there for hours, until the clock hands met at midnight. His phone buzzed again. Another reminder of meetings, contracts, obligations that suddenly felt like echoes from another life. He turned the screen face down on the nightstand. Somewhere in the hall, a nurse was humming softly, a tune that might have been a lullaby. The sound drifted through the open doorway and settled over them like a blessing. Hazel stirred slightly, her fingers curling around his. For the first time in years, Elias felt a calm that had nothing to do with success or control. It was the quiet peace of being present. He leaned back in the chair, exhaustion catching up with him, eyes fixed on his daughter's face. "We'll start over," he murmured, half asleep. "Just you, me, and Noah." Oh? The world outside was still wrapped in stormlight. But inside that small hospital room, something had changed. The man who had once built towers of glass and steel had finally learned the value of a single heartbeat, of a small hand resting in his own. The storm had passed by morning, leaving Asheville under a silver hush. The streets shimmered with ice. The rooftops looked dipped in glass. Elias drove home through the quiet, his tires crunching over thin sheets of frost. The sky had cleared to a pale blue that made every sound sharper: the hum of the engine, the faint whisper of the heater, the steady rhythm of his heart reminding him he was still here. He hadn't slept. He didn't want to. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Hazel in that hospital bed, her hand small inside his own, her breathing fragile but steady. When he reached his penthouse, the city still slept beneath a thin veil of mist. He parked, climbed the stairs instead of taking the elevator, and unlocked the door to a silence that greeted him like an old, empty friend. The faint scent of last night's wine lingered in the air. He placed his keys on the counter and glanced around. The trophies on the shelves gleamed in the soft light. They looked colder than ever. On the dining table, his phone buzzed messages from the board, his assistant, the press. He didn't read any of them. He walked to his study instead. The place felt untouched by life. Polished desk, closed blinds, a line of books, too perfect to have been read. He sat down, the chair creaking under him, and switched on his computer. For a moment, the screen's glow filled the room, stark and lonely. His cursor hovered over a folder labeled Security Footage, Launch Night. He hadn't meant to open it, but the thought came: the girl with the crayon drawing. He remembered her outside the hotel, standing in the snow, the way she had looked up at him. The same drawing he'd seen taped to Hazel's backpack. He double-clicked the file. The video flickered to life, grainy but clear enough. The ballroom shimmered with light and motion, music, laughter, 1,000 smiles that meant nothing. Then the camera shifted toward the glass terrace. There, through the flurries of snow, stood the small figure in a red coat, clutching a paper in her hands. She looked up at the building as if searching for someone inside. Elias leaned forward, heart tightening. He saw himself in the frame, standing near the window, champagne glass in hand, oblivious. The little girl waved once. He didn't move, didn't even turn his head. He froze the frame. The drawing in her hand was unmistakable. 3 figures under an umbrella. "Dad and me," he exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the desk. "How did you get there?" he murmured. He scrubbed the timeline back, zoomed in on her face. It wasn't Hazel. The hair was lighter, the features slightly different, freckles across her nose, eyes the color of hazelnut. She couldn't have been more than 8, but something about her expression, the hope mixed with fear, felt hauntingly familiar. The timestamp on the video read 9:12 p.m., just before he'd received Hazel's message. He sat back in the chair, trembling. The heater clicked softly in the corner. He replayed the clip once more, slower this time. until the girl vanished into the snow. For the first time, he felt something larger than guilt, a sense that the universe was trying to speak, to show him a truth he hadn't earned yet. He didn't know who the girl was, but he knew this much. He couldn't ignore her twice. He saved the still frame of her face, printed it, and held the paper under the morning light. The ink was still warm when he whispered, "I'll find you." Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, scattering light across the frost. Elias didn't even change his clothes. He folded the printed photo, slipped it into the pocket of his coat, and left the apartment with the same restless urgency that had driven him through the storm the night before. The morning light had turned the snow into a mirror, bright, blinding. The city was waking slowly, a few cars moving cautiously through slush-covered streets. He drove back toward the hotel, the same road he had taken countless times before, but now it looked like a place he was seeing for the first time. When he arrived, the Grand Whitmore retreat stood silent under the pale Sunday. The staff was already shoveling snow from the entrance, their breath visible in the cold. One of them recognized him and started to wave, but he walked straight past. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and polish. The grand chandelier above the lobby glistened, each crystal fragment catching a shard of light. The night's applause and laughter were gone. All that remained was a faint echo, the memory of how empty victory could sound. He approached the front desk. "I need to see last night's security footage," he said. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled. The clerk blinked, confused. "Mr. Whitmore, is something wrong? I just need to check one thing. Please." Moments later, a security guard led him into a small control room behind the lobby. The walls were lined with monitors, most showing empty hallways and parking lots dusted with snow. Elias handed him the folded printout. "She was outside the terrace around 9 o'clock. Can you check the exterior cameras?" The guard adjusted a few controls, fast-forwarding through grainy clips of guests leaving, cars idling, snow swirling under the lamps. Then, there she was, the same little girl in the red coat, standing by the gate, waiting. "Do you know her?" Elias asked. The guard shook his head. "She came around sunset, sir. Said she wanted to leave a drawing for someone. Didn't say who. Did she talk to anyone else?" "Just the doorman, maybe. I think she gave him something." Elias turned sharply. "Where can I find him?" They found the doorman near the entrance, sweeping salt over the icy steps. His face lit up in surprise when he saw Elias. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore. About last night," Elias began, pulling the photo from his pocket. "Did this girl give you something?" The man hesitated, then reached into his coat and produced a small folded piece of paper, slightly damp from melted snow. "She said it was for the man in the suit who never looks outside." Elias unfolded it with trembling hands. Inside was another crayon drawing this time. Two figures by a lake, holding hands, a small house in the distance. Beneath it, a name written in uneven letters, Ember. He stared at it for a long moment. The name meant nothing to him, and yet it felt impossibly familiar, like a word he'd once spoken in a dream. "Did she say where she lived?" The doorman frowned. "No, but she came from the east side, I think. Walked here alone." The bus driver dropped her at the wrong stop and she just kept walking. Elias folded the paper carefully, his chest tightening. A child walking alone through snow to reach him while he hadn't even looked out the window. He thanked the man, then stepped back outside. The wind was picking up again, scattering bits of ice through the air. He tucked the drawing inside his coat, next to his heart. In the distance, the mountains glowed faintly in the afternoon Sunday. Somewhere beyond them, a little girl named Ember was waiting, though neither of them yet knew why their lives had crossed. He started the car, the engine rumbling softly in the cold, and whispered to himself, "I won't miss the chance again." The tires rolled over the slush, heading east toward the quiet neighborhoods beyond the hills. Behind him, the towering glass hotel faded in the rearview mirror like a monument to all the years he had wasted looking inward. Ahead, the road curved into light. The drive east took nearly an hour, though Elias barely noticed the time. The road wound through quiet neighborhoods, their yards still blanketed in snow. Children were out in boots and scarves, rolling snowballs beneath the soft winter light. The sight felt foreign to him, so ordinary, so alive. He passed a sign that read, "Maple Hollow, population 3,406. It wasn't even on the company maps he used to study in meetings. A small town nestled between two hills, where the smell of pine drifted through the air, and the sound of a distant freight train hummed like a heartbeat. He parked near a corner diner, its neon sign flickering breakfast all day. Inside, the scent of bacon and coffee wrapped around him like a forgotten comfort. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with a gentle face and tired eyes, greeted him with a warm, "Morning, Honorable. You look like you've been driving a while." Elias nodded. "You could say that." He took a seat by the window, glancing at the frost forming delicate veins on the glass. When she poured his coffee, he pulled out the folded drawing and placed it on the table. "Do you happen to know a little girl named Ember? Maybe 8, red coat, lives around here?" The woman looked at the paper for a long time, her expression softening. "Ember Collins," she said finally. "Lives down by the train tracks with her aunt. Poor thing's had a rough go of it." What do you mean?" "Her mama passed a few years back. Daddy's, well, gone. The aunt's been raising her ever since." Elias felt his stomach tighten. "Do you know where exactly?" "Old Station Road. You'll see a yellow mailbox that leans a little to the left. Hard to miss." He thanked her, paid for the coffee, and stepped back outside. The cold bit at his face as the wind picked up again. Across the street, the freight train rumbled slowly past, its sound echoing through the valley. Following the directions, he drove until the asphalt turned to gravel. The houses grew smaller, the fences older. He finally saw it, the yellow mailbox, leaning just as the waitress had said. The small house behind it looked tired, but loved. Smoke drifted gently from the chimney, and a bicycle with one bent wheel rested near the porch. Elias parked the car and sat for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel. He could hear his heart, steady but uncertain. He stepped out, his shoes crunching against the frozen ground, and approached the porch. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. A woman in her late 30s appeared, wearing a wool sweater and holding a dish towel. Her eyes were sharp but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked. He hesitated, pulling the folded drawing from his coat. "My name is Elias Whitmore. I think your niece might have come to see me." Her gaze dropped to the paper, recognition flickering instantly. "So, you're the man from the hotel." Elias blinked. "She told you?" "She didn't have to. She drew you again and again." The woman sighed, leaning on the door frame. "You'd better come in before you freeze." Inside, the house smelled of cinnamon and wood smoke. The walls were lined with photos, school portraits, drawings, little mementos that made the space feel alive. "She's at school right now," the aunt said, setting a kettle on the stove. "You'll find her in Mrs. Green's class over at Maple Hollow Elementary. But before you go running over there, maybe you should tell me why she went looking for you." Elias looked down at the drawing again. The crayon lines blurred slightly where his thumb had pressed too hard. "I'm not sure," he admitted softly, "but I intend to find out." The woman studied him for a long moment, then gave a faint smile that held both doubt and understanding. "Well, Mr. Whitmore, if you hurt that child's heart, you'll have me to answer to." He nodded, voice trembling. "I wouldn't blame you." Outside, the whistle of the train echoed once more across the hills, long and low, as if reminding him that some journeys, especially the ones home, can't be delayed forever. Maple Hollow Elementary sat at the edge of town, a modest brick building with a swing set out front and a mural of painted handprints along the wall. The wind carried faint laughter from the playground, mixed with the whistle of a passing train. Elias parked by the curb, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel, as if they could quiet the rush in his chest. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of crayons and floor polish. Teachers moved between rooms, their voices calm and steady. He followed the sound of children reading aloud until he reached a classroom with a hand-painted sign that said Mrs. Green's 3rd grade. He peeked through the small glass panel. 20 little heads were bent over notebooks, but one caught his eye, immediately red coat hanging on the chair, hair tied messily with a blue ribbon. Ember. His throat tightened. For a moment he couldn't move. Then Mrs. Green, noticing him, stepped into the hall. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked kindly. I'm looking for Ember Collins." Her expression softened with curiosity. "Are you family?" He hesitated, voice barely above a whisper. "Not exactly, but I think she might be mine." The teacher studied his face, then nodded quietly. Wait here a moment. Inside the classroom, she whispered something to Ember, who looked up instantly. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but recognition. She slipped off her chair and walked toward the door, her small boots tapping softly on the tile. Elias straightened, unsure what to do with his hands. The moment she stepped into the hallway, time seemed to hold its breath. "Hi," she said simply, voice clear as morning. "You're the man from the hotel." He nodded, heart pounding. "I think so." She tilted her head, studying him the way children do without judgment, but with the quiet precision of truth. "You didn't see me that night." The word struck deeper than any accusation could have. He swallowed hard. "No, I didn't, but I should have." For a long moment, they just stood there, the man who had everything and the child who had nothing but a drawing. Then Ember reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "I made another one," she said, handing it to him. He opened it carefully. This time, the drawing showed 3 people again, but now there was a 4th. A woman with brown hair holding hands with Ember. Beneath it, written in uneven letters, were the words, "When we all come home." Elias blinked rapidly, his voice unsteady. "That's beautiful," she shrugged lightly, a shy smile breaking through. "Aunt June says if you draw something enough times, sometimes it comes true." He knelt down so they were eye level. "And do you think that will come true?" She nodded without hesitation. "If you don't forget again." He closed his eyes for a second, letting her words sink into the space where guilt had lived for years. When he opened them again, his voice was soft but sure. "I won't." From the classroom door, Mrs. Green watched quietly, sensing something far bigger than a reunion. Elias extended his hand. "Would it be all right if I walked you home today?" Ember looked at him carefully, then reached out her small hand and slipped it into his. "Okay." They walked out together into the pale winter sunlight. The snow had begun to melt, leaving puddles that reflected the sky. Ember skipped ahead, boots splashing lightly, her laughter echoing across the schoolyard. Elias followed, slower, but smiling for the first time in years. Behind them, the train passed again, its long whistle trailing across the valley, no longer a sound of departure, but of return. The days that followed unfolded with the quiet rhythm of a life rediscovered. Elias found himself returning to Maple Hollow each morning, sometimes with cocoa for Ember, sometimes just to watch her laughter drift through the schoolyard. It had been years since he'd driven anywhere without a calendar dictating his path, years since he'd cared where the road led as long as it wasn't toward another meeting. Aunt June had begun to tolerate his visits, though her eyes still measured him with the caution of someone who had seen too many promises broken. She was practical, kind in the way small-town women often were, firm but fair, her warmth hidden behind the steam of her morning coffee. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, she invited him in for tea. "You've been coming around a lot," she said, stirring honey into her cup. "I suppose I should ask what exactly it is you're looking for." Elias took a breath, staring into the rising steam. "Answers," he said simply. "And maybe forgiveness." June studied him for a moment, then nodded toward a small wooden box on the shelf. "If it's answers you want, they might be in there. Been sitting for years." He looked at her, puzzled. "What is it?" "Letters, from Ember's mama. She wrote them but never sent them. I found them after she passed." The words landed softly, but carried a weight that filled the room. Elias hesitated before reaching for the box. The wood was smooth and faintly scented with lavender. Inside were a dozen envelopes, all sealed but aged at the corners, each one marked with careful handwriting. "For Elias Whitmore." His hands trembled. "You knew who I was all along?" June sighed. "She told me before she died. Said you'd never know, but maybe someday fate would find its way." Elias sank into the chair, the air around him suddenly heavy. He opened the first envelope. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but legible. "Dear Elias, you once said success was about leaving something behind. I wish you had meant someone instead. I don't blame you for choosing your world over mine, but there's a little girl who has your eyes. When she laughs, it's the only sound that makes me believe we did something right once." His chest tightened. He set the letter down, hands trembling as he reached for another. "She asks about you sometimes. I tell her you're building big things far away, that someday she'll understand why you had to go. If she ever finds you, please be kind. She doesn't need explanations. Just someone who stays. The words blurred before his eyes. For years he had built towers of glass, bridges of steel, but not once had he built a path back to the people who had waited for him. June's voice broke through the silence. She never wanted money, Elias. Just for you to know. He nodded slowly, voice raw. I didn't even know she was gone. She didn't want you to. He closed the last letter, pressing it to his chest. And Ember? He whispered. Does she know? June shook her head. Not yet. She only knows her father left. The rest, I figured life would decide when she was ready. Elias looked out the window. The last light of evening painted the fields in gold and ash. He felt the ache of every year he had missed first steps, birthdays, scraped knees, lullabies unsung. Yet for the first time, the pain didn't paralyze him. It pointed him forward. He rose slowly, his voice steady, despite the tremor beneath it. Then life's decided, he said. It's time she knew who I really am. That night, the house by the tracks was wrapped in the hush that only winter can bring. The wood stove murmured softly, and snowflakes pressed against the window like quiet witnesses. Elias sat at the kitchen table, the letters spread before him in a fan of pale paper and faded ink. He'd read them all twice, maybe 3 times. Each word felt like a heartbeat from a life he had missed. Aunt June had gone to bed early, leaving him alone with the sound of the ticking clock and the creak of the house settling. Ember's laughter still echoed faintly in his mind. She'd fallen asleep after a story, clutching her stuffed bear, her cheeks pink from cocoa. He stared at the last letter again, the one written in a trembling hand. If she ever finds you, Elias, please don't turn away. She's stronger than I ever was. But every child needs to know they were wanted once. He closed his eyes. The truth was simple now, stripped of excuses. He had failed them both. The floorboards creaked softly. When he turned, Ember was standing in the doorway, her small figure wrapped in a blanket, hair tousled, eyes wide and questioning. Couldn't sleep, she murmured. The train woke me up. Elias tried to smile. It's loud tonight, huh? She nodded, then noticed the letters on the table. What are those? He hesitated. His instinct was to hide them, to protect her, or maybe to protect himself, but there was no hiding left to do. Slowly, he motioned for her to come closer. They're from your mother, he said quietly. She wrote them a long time ago. Ember climbed onto the chair beside him, curiosity brightening her tired eyes. You knew my mama? He swallowed hard. The words caught somewhere between guilt and love. Yes, he said. A long time ago. We cared for each other very much. She traced a finger along the edge of one envelope. She used to tell me stories about a man who built tall buildings, said he could touch the clouds if he wanted to. Elias's voice trembled. She was talking about me. Ember blinked, her brows furrowing. Then why didn't you ever come back? The question landed like a stone in his chest. He looked down, unable to meet her eyes. Because I was foolish. I thought work mattered more than people. And by the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late. She was silent for a moment, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. You're my dad, she said at last, not as a question, but as a truth she'd already begun to feel. Elias nodded slowly, his vision blurring. Yes, Ember, I am. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked softly, the snow tapped the glass, and the world seemed to wait. Finally, Ember climbed down from her chair and stood in front of him. Her voice was small, but steady. Mama used to say I had his eyes. I didn't think she meant you. He let out a broken laugh through the tears. She was right. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. The blanket fell to the floor. Elias froze, then held her tight carefully, like she was something fragile he'd only just learned how to hold. I was mad sometimes, Ember whispered against his shoulder, because I thought maybe I did something wrong. He shook his head, tears falling into her hair. You did nothing wrong. Not a single thing. Outside, the train passed again, its low whistle rolling through the valley. But this time, it didn't sound like distance. It sounded like return, like a promise being kept. When she finally pulled away, she wiped her face with the sleeve of her pajamas and smiled faintly. So, if you're my dad now, does that mean you're staying? Elias looked at her, really looked, and felt the weight of every choice melt into something lighter. "If you'll let me," he said. Ember nodded as if she'd already decided. "Mama said everyone deserves one more chance. I think she was right." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She was always right." "Oh." The two sat quietly as the snow fell thicker outside, the letters still open on the table, not as reminders of regret anymore, but as bridges finally crossed. For the first time in many years, Elias didn't feel like a man haunted by the past. He felt like a father, and that, somehow, was enough. Winter in Maple Hollow had a way of softening everything, even the hardest memories. The snow that once looked like a barrier now felt like a quiet bridge between past and present. Days passed gently in the little house by the tracks, and with each one, Elias began to learn what it meant to stay. He woke early now, before sunrise, just to pack Ember's lunch, peanut butter sandwiches cut into uneven hearts, because she said the ones that weren't perfect tasted better. He learned the rhythm of her laughter, the way she talked to the old stray cat that came by the porch, the way she still drew pictures before bed this time, always including him. The town, however, noticed. Maple Hollow was small. Whispers traveled faster than trains. The man from the city, the millionaire with glass towers and no past, now seen walking a little girl to school every morning. At the diner, folks would glance up from their coffee cups when he came in. Some nodded politely. Others just stared, curiosity wrapped in quiet judgment. One morning, Sheriff Dale, a heavy-set man with kind eyes, slid into the booth across from him. "Heard you're spending a lot of time down by the tracks," he said, stirring his coffee. Elias smiled faintly. "That's home now." The sheriff studied him. "You planning to make it official? Folks get nervous when someone with your kind of money starts hanging around kids that aren't theirs." Elias looked up, meeting his gaze without flinching. "She is mine." The sheriff blinked. "That so?" "Yes. I didn't know for years, but I know now, and I'm not going anywhere." For a moment, the sheriff said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. "Guess everyone deserves a second winter." He tipped his hat and left. When Elias stepped outside, snowflakes drifted lazily in the sunlight. Across the street, Aunt June stood by her car, waiting. "Word travels fast here," she said dryly. "I noticed." She sighed. "Don't mind them. People here don't mean harm. They just need time to see who you really are." "Oh." He nodded, watching as Ember ran out of the schoolyard, waving her mittened hands. "Hey, Dad," she shouted, her voice ringing clear across the snow. Every head turned children, parents, even the teacher by the gate. Elias froze for a second, then smiled so wide it hurt. "Hey, kiddo," he called back, kneeling as she ran into his arms. Later that evening, the warmth of the fireplace filled the small living room. Ember sat cross-legged on the rug, sketching a picture of a bridge under falling snow. "What's that one called?" he asked, leaning over her shoulder. "The bridge between winters," she said without looking up. "It's for people who got lost but find their way back." He looked at her, really looked, and felt something shift deep inside. "That's a good name," he said softly. She smiled. "I think it's our story." The next morning brought a letter, this time official. A custody review. The state wanted to confirm the child's guardianship, now that her father had resurfaced. June handed it to him with quiet dread. "It's standard procedure," she said, "but it won't be easy. They'll want proof you can care for her." Elias turned the paper over in his hand, the seal catching the light. "Then I'll prove it," he said calmly. "Not with words, with what I do." June studied him for a moment and nodded. "She believes in you, you know. That's half the battle." "Oh." He folded the letter and slipped it into his jacket. Outside, the wind carried the sound of distant bells from the church tower, soft, steady, like a heartbeat calling him forward. This time, he didn't look back. The letter had brought an unfamiliar weight to the little house by the tracks. For days, the warmth of laughter seemed quieter, as though even the fire hesitated to crackle. Elias tried to keep everything steady, making breakfast, helping Ember with homework, reading to her before bed, but the thought of losing her now haunted every quiet moment. When the caseworker from the county arrived, she was polite but distant. Her name was Mrs. Albright, a woman in her 50s with neat hair and a clipboard that looked heavier than it should. She spoke in measured tones, the kind used by people who've seen too many families fall apart. "So, Mr. Whitmore," she began, glancing around the living room. You understand this is standard procedure. Given your background and recent involvement, the court needs assurance that this environment is stable for the child. Elias nodded. I understand. She made notes as she walked, pausing to examine the framed drawings on the wall, the ones Ember had made over the past month. Him, her, and Aunt June standing by the tracks, the house behind them glowing with yellow light. Ember peeked out from the hallway, holding her teddy bear. Mrs. Albright smiled faintly. Hello, sweetheart. You must be Ember. The little girl nodded, clutching the bear tighter. Yes, ma'am. Do you like living here? The woman asked gently. Ember thought for a moment. I like it a lot better now. Why's that? Because my dad came back, she said simply. The caseworker blinked, caught off guard by the innocence in her tone. Elias looked away, fighting the ache in his chest. After the interview, Mrs. Albright asked to speak with him privately outside. The snow had melted into patches of ice that glittered under the pale afternoon Sunday. It's clear the girl loves you, she said. That counts for something. But love alone doesn't always build a home. He met her gaze steadily. No, but it's a start. And this time I'm not walking away. She studied him for a long moment before closing her notebook. We'll be in touch, Mr. Whitmore. When she left, Elias found Ember waiting on the porch steps, her boots dangling above the snow. She looked up at him, worried. Are they going to take me away? He sat beside her, exhaling slowly. No, kiddo. They just needed to see that we're real. Are we? She asked quietly. He smiled. More than anything I've ever built. They sat in silence for a while, watching the evening train pass. The air was filled with the smell of cold iron and pine. The whistle echoed softly, fading into the distance. Want to go for a walk? He asked. She nodded. They followed the narrow path behind the house until it led to a small wooden bridge spanning the frozen creek. The boards creaked under their feet, but it held firm. The light from the setting sun painted everything in gold and rose. This bridge, Elias said, resting a hand on the railing, reminds me of us. 2 winters, one before and one after, and everything we had to cross to meet in the middle. Ember leaned against him, her breath clouding in the air. So we made it? He nodded. We did. She looked up at him, eyes reflecting the pink sky. Then let's promise something. Okay, he said softly. What's the promise? That we won't miss another winter. Not one. He smiled, feeling tears sting his eyes. Deal. Oh, they sealed it the way only families do, no ceremony, no paper, just a small pinky finger hooked around his. The sun dipped below the mountains, and the bridge beneath them glowed faintly in the last light of day. In that moment, Elias understood that redemption wasn't a grand gesture. It was this, the warmth of a small hand in his, a promise whispered against the cold, a second winter shared instead of lost. Winter melted quietly in Maple Hollow. The snow that once blanketed every roof and memory began to fade into streams of light. The air smelled of pine and rain, and the first crocuses pushed through the thawing earth. Elias stood on the porch, watching Ember chase the cat across the muddy yard. Her laughter carried on the wind, bright and certain. For the first time in years, he wasn't counting days or deadlines. He was simply here. The custody letter came back that morning, stamped, signed, final. Full guardianship approved. Elias didn't need to read it twice. He just smiled, folded the paper, and slipped it into his coat pocket next to the drawing Ember had made of the bridge. Later that afternoon, the town gathered near the old train station. A small banner fluttered above the door. Smallback's Foundation, Opening Day. Elias looked up at the sign and whispered, "For all the children who carry too much." Reporters came, not for headlines, but out of curiosity. They asked him what inspired the project. He gestured toward Ember, standing shyly beside him, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Because one small back carried the weight of my mistakes, he said, and still stood tall. Applause rippled through the crowd, soft and genuine. Aunt June wiped her eyes. Even Sheriff Dale tipped his hat. As the ceremony ended, the first warm rain of spring began to fall. Ember laughed and reached out her hand. "Come on, Dad," she said. "You're gonna miss it." Elias joined her, stepping into the drizzle. They walked across the wooden bridge behind the center, the same one where they'd made their winter promise. The boards were slick, the creek below alive again with melted snow. Ember lifted her face to the rain. Feels different now, she said. He smiled. That's what spring does. It turns old pain into new beginnings. She took his hand, and together they crossed the bridge not toward the past, but toward everything that waited ahead. And somewhere between the raindrops and the laughter, Elias realized redemption didn't end with forgiveness. It bloomed quietly, stubbornly, every time love was chosen over regret. Evening came softly to Maple Hollow. The spring rain had passed, leaving the air scented with lilac and wet earth. The old bridge behind the foundation shimmered beneath the lantern lights Elias had strung himself, one for every child the center would help. Inside, the laughter of families filled the rooms. Volunteers served cocoa. Someone played an old guitar, and the walls, once quiet and cold, now echoed with life. Elias stood by the doorway, watching Ember draw at one of the tables. She was sketching again. A man, a girl, and a bridge surrounded by blooming trees. Above it, she wrote in bright blue crayon, "Home isn't a place. It's someone who stays." He smiled, that soft kind of smile that comes from both joy and ache. Aunt June came over with 2 mugs of coffee. "You did good, Elias," she said. He chuckled. "Took me a lifetime to figure out how simple good really is." They watched as Ember ran outside, her boots splashing through puddles. She waved from the bridge. "Come on, Dad! Last one across owes ice cream!" Elias raised his hands in surrender. All right, but only 1 scoop this time." When they met halfway, she took his hand. Just like that first winter day, the sky turned gold, the air filled with the quiet hum of crickets, and for a long moment, everything stood still. Ember looked up at him and whispered, almost the same words that had once broken him, but now stitched him whole again. "Promise you won't forget again?" He knelt beside her, brushing the rain from her hair. "Not this time, sweetheart. Not ever again." The train passed in the distance, slow and steady, its sound fading into the hills. Elias turned toward the horizon, toward the season still waiting for them, and felt peace, real and deep, settle in his chest. Because some stories don't end where they began. They end when we finally come home. The sound of the train faded into the distance, leaving behind only the rustle of the spring wind through the trees. The lights of the Smallbacks Foundation glowed softly against the dusk, each one a quiet reminder that sometimes second chances arrive when we stop running from the first. Elias stood on that wooden bridge, watching the creek flow freely again beneath the melting snow, and knew that redemption wasn't something earned overnight. It was something built one day, one promise, one small act of love at a time. He had once lived among towers of glass and applause, but true success had waited for him here, in the laughter of a little girl with bright eyes and a heart far bigger than her years. The man who once measured worth in contracts and profits now measured it in moments: the smell of rain on pine, the sound of his daughter's footsteps running through the yard, the warmth of a home finally alive again. As the seasons turned, he learned the simplest truth of all, that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about showing up and staying. Ember's small hand in his had become his compass, guiding him away from the noise of ambition and toward the peace of belonging. And for everyone who's ever looked back and wished they could start over, Elias's story reminds us it's never too late to come home. Love, after all, is the quiet architect of every bridge we cross. It takes no wealth, no status, no perfect words, just the courage to reach out, even after years of silence. Like the porch light left on for someone we still hope will return, kindness doesn't fade with time. It waits patiently, glowing softly through the storms of life. The lesson is simple but timeless. Love and forgiveness can rebuild what years of distance tried to destroy. Happiness doesn't come from what we own, but from who waits for us at the table. Everyone deserves a family, a place to be seen, and a chance to begin again. Sometimes the smallest gesture, a hug, a phone call, a quiet "I'm sorry," is enough to change the ending of an entire life story. Maybe you've felt that too, the ache of what could have been, or the warmth of someone who never gave up on you. And if you listen closely, you might still hear that same whisper carried on the evening wind, the voice that says, "You can still go home." So tonight, wherever you are, whether you're sitting by your kitchen window with a cup of coffee or listening as the rain taps gently on your roof, remember this: forgiveness is a kind of spring that never ends. It blooms inside anyone brave enough to care again. If this story touched your heart, press 1 inch the comments. If you think it could be better, or wish to share your thoughts, press 0. And before you go, take a quiet moment to ask yourself who in your life might be waiting for you to cross that bridge again. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between winter and spring is the courage to reach for one more chance.